morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our session today. I'm Tim Finnegan. I am the Regional Sales Manager for State Government for Centrify. And once again, thank you for attending our session. I'm going to turn it over here to Tony real quick so we can get right into the heart of it. Please speak up at any time during the session, try to make it as interactive as possible. If we get down too far on one topic, we might have to table it and talk to you after the presentation. We have a booth here too if you want to stop by there, or we can huddle up here in the hallway right after the session ends up. So thanks again for your attendance today, and I'll turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everybody. Let's kick it off with a little bit of a video. Try not to make it too much of a downer, but
China hacked the data of 4 million current and former federal employees in what is the largest breach of federal worker data in recent years. Well, OPM handles the personal information as well as sensitive security clearance information for millions of federal workers, federal employees. They include people who have top-level security clearances as well as those who don't, but it was a database that included very personal information, social security numbers, training information. China is a very aggressive actor in cyberspace and has targeted the networks of the U.S. government and commercial companies for well over a decade now. And increasingly we're seeing that they're going after large databases of information on Americans to include workers, which could be useful for everything from recruitment, recruiting for potential spies, for blackmail, to building up dossiers on employees that they consider particularly important or of interest. This information could also be used to craft more targeted cyber attack campaigns on individuals.
okay, the reason I threw that up there, I actually wanted to call attention to a couple of statements that Ellen made towards the end. Let me just quote that from, I've got it written down here. She said, increasingly we're seeing that they're going after large databases of users, which could be used to craft more targeted cyber attack campaigns on individuals. It's my emphasis on the words individuals here. So as I go through this presentation, we're going to talk about cyber attacks. We're going to talk about how they're getting more advanced and more sophisticated, and how your sensitive information can be better protected by looking at the problem from a different angle, which is one of identity management, and really trying to manage those identities, both on the individual side as well as the privileged side. That's why I made emphasis to this, because Alan was quite right. It's not just about the privileged identities, it's about the individual identities as well. So there's going to be an emphasis on that during this presentation. So with that, my name's Tony Goulding. I work with Centrify, a couple of hours down the road in Santa Clara is where we have our HQ. Been around for about 10 years, and this is what we do. We live and breathe and sort of wake and sleep, and we talk about identity management and how to protect your sensitive assets from these cyber attacks. You probably detected a slight accent. I'm not from around here. So just a little bit about myself. I'm from Wales. That's the Welsh flag, if you're unfamiliar with the Welsh flag. Very dramatic, very kind of Harry Potter-esque, but that's our flag. I'm very proud of that flag. And for those who don't know where Wales is, it's actually that purple thing. You can't see the word Wales in there because of the projector, but that's where Wales is. A lot of people think it's part of England. It really isn't. It hangs off the edge of England, or as I like to say, England hangs off the edge of Wales. So that's where Wales is in the kind of grand scheme of the UK. And I'm from a little town in Wales called Llangollen, which is actually one of the more easy to pronounce places. You doubt me? So just a couple of minutes up the road from where I was born is this place. So I challenge you to say that. It's actually very easy. It's Roslan Llangollen, right? Roslan Llangollen. I nearly spat my mint out. Okay, but you think that's bad? Then there's this one. So and that's a real place. That's the railway station. That's the name of the place that you see when you come in. Any takers? Anybody?
Is that also your password, Tony?
So, you know what? We can learn a lot from Welsh place names when it comes to securing access to accounts. But for those who really want to hear it, and I like saying it because, I can, it's Llanfair Pwll Gwyngyll Gogerach Gwynrobol Llantysilio Gogogoch. Thank you. And that's the end of my presentation. All right. It does have a meaning. I will talk to you about that afterwards. It does have a meaning. Trust me. All right. Let's get into the meat of this thing. So What we're going to do here is we're going to talk about some of the trends impacting data security, and this is from our perspective. Obviously, we've developed software solutions that help prevent these cyber attacks, and so I'm going to share with you some of the trends that we're seeing from an organizational perspective. And I'm going to talk about some of the best practices that we believe you need to really address when it comes to mitigating your risks of being breached. And this is just a subset. I've actually got 10 of them, and I put them in an appendix because we don't have enough time to go through them here. I've already upset somebody. She's on her way out. Oh, no, that's good.
I'm sorry, I'm allergic to perfume.
Oh, is that me? Oh, sorry. Okay, so I've got 10 best practices. They're in the appendix. You'll be able to download the presentation separately, and you'll have the benefit of those. And I'll tap into 3 or 4 of the ones that I think are probably the most important during this presentation. If we have time, we'll have a case study. We'd like some Q&A. If we don't have time for that, we will be here, and we'll also be in our booth, so you can just pin us down anytime. Okay, so let's jump straight into this. Trends impacting data security. So really, to get to the main tenet of our philosophy, we believe that identity is the new perimeter. And, you know, it's great that we have defense in depth, and we'll always need defense in depth. Security is not just a single Band-Aid. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. So we do need layers of defenses, but we believe that the traditional network-based perimeters, the firewalls, the IDSs, even some of the more modern APT detection tools are just not sufficient on their own. You need to really focus on the identities. So we believe that identity is really at the center of cyber attacks. And in addition to that, the deperimeterization, which could be another Welsh word, it's very long, the deperimeterization is expanding the threat surface or the attack surface. And I'll use that phrase quite a lot, an attack surface. Sometimes it's hard to get your mind around, you know, what do I need to do to protect my assets? And the way I tend to look at it is kind of qualitatively. How big is my attack surface? How big of a surface do I present to potential attackers that gives them an avenue or a set of vectors into my data, gives them an opportunity to attack our stuff? So along with that, the enterprise security model is still under attack. No big surprise there. It is getting worse. The attackers are getting more and more sophisticated, and they're finding ways to breach our perimeter defenses. They're finding very, very creative ways of bypassing the traditional network-based defenses that we've got in place. So we need additional tools. We need additional insights and additional controls in order to help protect ourselves. And there's been a lot of press about this. I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with the press. You can't quite read these here, but these little articles are all about breaching of both individual user accounts, the type that you and I use to log into LinkedIn and Facebook and Google and all these other things, as well as privileged accounts, the accounts that have the keys to the kingdom in your servers and your network devices. So it's not just about the privileged identities, going back to Ellen's video at the beginning. It's also about individuals, okay? And the analysts have jumped in as well. So it's not just, you know, hyperbole. It's not just press sort of getting all above themselves. The analysts have tracked this as well. This is the Verizon 2015 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. And they're saying 95% of breaches are from compromised credentials. And if you want to go even further than that, then Mandiant. Mandiant is a FireEye company. FireEye are also out there in the lobby, and they have some great solutions as well. They say 100% of breaches involve stolen credentials. So, you know, 95 to 100%, go down as far as 80 if you want. There's a lot of evidence to support the fact that your data is being breached due to those credentials being compromised. And again, I emphasize, it's not just privileged credentials, it's individual accounts and their credentials as well. And we'll dig into that a little bit more as we move on. So the attack surface is expanding. That's the trend. And on one side, we've got the attackers who are just getting more and more sophisticated. So the term APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, it's got the word advanced in it for a reason, because the tools that they use in order to get into your systems and compromise your information are very complex and they're very advanced. So here's a look at a typical kind of attack chain, if you will. This is taken from Mandiant. And there's a flow to this. I mean, you can almost it almost looks like a project plan to me. You can almost imagine a group of attackers, instead of the old image of an attacker in some Eastern European country sitting in a dank basement with a hoodie on in front of a glowing screen trying to attack, sort of hack their way into your system. You can picture 4 or 5 people sat in a coffee shop and they're going, okay, so, all right, Joe, so you can do the initial compromise, okay? We've got some great people. We've got a list of individuals, and why don't you attack these first? We'll do a bit of social engineering. We've got some great tools to help you with that. Get into a few accounts, get onto a few computers, and once you kind of got your way onto their individual laptops, then over to Mary. So Mary, you take the baton then and see if you can establish a foothold. See if you can start hacking away at memory and looking for hashes of passwords. Maybe if we're lucky, a domain administrator's logged into your laptop over the last 2 or 3 months and they've left a password hash in memory. We've got the tools, we can suck that right out. We've got lots of great tools to help us get to those privileged accounts. And then, and Bert over there, once Mary's done that, then you can start elevating privileges. You can start using these accounts to elevate your privileges and then start to creep around the network and do lateral expansion. We can exploit those pass the hash techniques. We can use those in order to move laterally throughout the network. And once we've done that, still laying low, maybe over the course of about 6 months, so we haven't kind of triggered any alerts or anything, then we can do the complete recon. We can start downloading our malware, figuring out how to exfiltrate data, and then we're off to completing our mission and monetizing what we've done. You can kind of picture it. This is what it is. It's an enterprise. These people are advanced, they're sophisticated, they're teams of specialists, no longer these people that are just sitting in their bedrooms trying to hack their way in and pile drive through the firewall. They're using legitimate credentials and legitimate IDs to log into your VPN, to log into a server on the network, and then move around. So it's very, very sophisticated. So even today, passwords are still the weakest link. I mean, back in 2012, 2013, this little experiment with Ars Technica occurred, and 3 experts managed to do 350 billion guesses per second on a set of encrypted passwords, and they got, where was it? I think the time frame was in 6 hours, they got 90% of the 6.5 million password hashes cracked. That was back in 2012. And today, just fast forward 2 or 3 years, there's even more advanced and more sophisticated tools that they're using to break into the systems. And the problem is the passwords are still around, right? I mean, they're there. They're used all the time, especially on individual accounts, right? On the privileged side of the house with server access and network device access and the accounts that we use to manage those, yeah, we're trying to do better there. But it's not just about the privileged accounts. It's about the individual accounts that they leverage as a vector to making their way into those privileged accounts. So with OPM, I mean, that's an example. They were breached 3 times since October 2013. And the purple bar there, you can't see the dates, but that represents the amount of time before the breach was detected. So again, it's kind of a testament to how sophisticated these people are. They bed down and they stay low, and they're like covert operations. They kind of reconnoiter and figure out weaknesses, and they use little bits of malware to look at vulnerabilities and exploit them. So it really is a sophisticated approach to trying to get access to your crown jewels. So on the one side, I've just spoken about the sophistication of the attackers, okay? On the other side, you've got the expansion of your real estate. So there is the cloud out there, and people are starting to leverage more and more of the cloud. The perimeter is dissolving. So we're finding, both in the government space as well as commercial, that there is a tremendous influx of Macintoshes, of mobile devices, of SaaS applications. To a lesser extent here, infrastructure as a service, but in my opinion, that's just something that's waiting to happen. And it's all about access anywhere. It's all about convenience. It's all about giving your users rapid and easy access to the resources that they need to do their job. And security has always been a balance, right? It's kind of security at the expense of productivity. So the goal here is that if you are expanding like this, you need more security. You need the security to protect yourself as this stuff evolves, as the traditional network perimeter dissolves, but without sacrificing productivity for your users. Because they just won't use the systems, or they'll figure out how to bypass, right? Shadow IT and all that good stuff. So
could we do a quick poll, perhaps? How many of you have deployed or considering cloud apps? So about a third of the room, okay? How many of you have Macintoshes that are growing in number in your environment? So a smaller amount, yeah, about maybe 10%. And then finally, how about mobile devices? Starting to deploy mobile, either BYOD or your own. So back to the third, okay? So that goes,
So it's certainly not isolated.
you know, I travel around the country speaking to state governments, and it depends on what you do as an agency, what your mission is, as to, you know, how these things may be playing for you, what your security concerns are. So it's always good to kind of get a feel for how things are going here.
Right.
Thank you.
So what we're looking to do at Centrify is put a kind of a virtual perimeter around all of this stuff, because we recognize that it's all over the place. It's no longer ideally under IT's control in a data center that they have control over. So our job is to provide these controls to protect access to your critical assets by really managing those identities, making sure that only the right people use them in the right way, and that they can't be used by APTs and attackers in order to find their way into your sensitive information. So, hey, guess what? I had a poll.
Oh, geez, sorry. Sorry, I didn't know
It's
that.
called coordination. It's good. No. So, but this is slightly different. So, how many of you have online accounts? Hands up if you have less than 10. Less than, and I'm not just talking about business, I'm talking about personal as well. Because remember, we're talking about individual accounts being a vector into your business world. No, all right, how about less than 20? Well, we get a few here. Less than 30? I want to see when all the hands up. Less than 40, come on guys. I mean, wow, all right, so what we're saying here is that if I'm an attacker and I'm thinking, you know what? To get economies of scale, because my time is valuable. I'm a businessman now, right? I'm not just somebody that's looking for, you know, sort of notoriety. I'm trying to make money at your expense. So I'm going to look for the biggest attack surface that's out there. Now, one of them is to try and figure out a way of getting through your firewall, breaching your firewall. That's kind of hard. Breaching your IDSs, hacking my way in illegitimately. And that's tough. The other one is to look at individual accounts like you folks, right? On Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Google, on Office 365. And socially engineer you folks and get a hold of your accounts and figure out whether or not I can then use those to legitimately get through your firewall, get through your VPN, be on the system in a quote-unquote legitimate manner. Now, of course, there's behavioral analytics that can help kind of identify odd things about people, but you know, they're few and far between. They're not fully scoped out yet. There are some good ones out there, but basically, this is the biggest attack surface, so we cannot ignore this. And of course, you know, the states. If we're here this time next year, I'm sure there's going to be more states who are adopting SaaS, or at least allowing the agencies to adopt commercial SaaS applications for productivity reasons. So, you know, this to me is a fait accompli. It's just the way that things are going. So what are we left from an IT perspective? What we have, oh, this is interesting. I don't think that some of these, oh, there we go. So what we have from an IT perspective is pain. I'm sorry, it's pain. So traditionally, we've had pain anyway, even before all of this cloud stuff, because the stuff on the left was hard to manage. We have identities all over the place, right? We may be able to take advantage of Active Directory, which is a good tool for managing these things centrally, okay? But that's if we're Windows-centric, and not everybody is, right? You may have Linux and Unix, and now, as we're hearing, more and more Macintoshes. So we've got identities floating around our data center, privileged identities, as well as individual identities on various applications. And of course, on the right, those are supposed to be little gray arrows where the plus signs are. We've now got more identities. And a lot of them are very much outside of IT's control. So, you know, you've got identity silos in Salesforce.com. You've got an identity silo in Office 365. You've got one in Facebook. So managing these things and provisioning users and de-provisioning users and making sure they have the right credentials and so on is very hard, right? And very often we find that there are agency level or corporate level social identities that are being used out there. So, for example, here, you know, at Centrify, we have a single identity that's shared for our Facebook account, right? kind of innocuous, not a lot of crown jewels there, but imagine what would happen if competitor hacked into that single shared privileged Facebook account and trashed our name on our own Facebook account. There's a credibility angle there. Could affect shareholder value if you're a public company, for example. So that's important as well. So getting your arm around those is a big, big problem, and it is getting worse. So what I'm getting to here, you can't see the gray. This is funny. It says the end user at the bottom in gray, but it's not projecting. So imagine at the bottom it says the end user. So we have end user devices, and we have end users with all of these different SaaS applications and other applications that they're accessing. That is a very, very large attack surface, okay? And what the attackers are doing is they're leveraging those to get to the privileged accounts, and it says the privileged user underneath there. So you have to kind of imagine what it says. And so they're getting access to your Red Hat servers, to your network devices. They're logging in to those things and logging into the domain controllers and setting themselves up with the keys to the kingdom so they can exploit your data. So one is a means to the other. Do they do that exclusively? No, but it's a massive attack surface that a lot of people forget about. Okay.
Maybe another quick poll is in order.
Go ahead.
All right, I hope I'm not ruining this one. So, and I expect this number to be lower here in this room because you guys are all security professionals, right? So how many of you use a password, same password or a similar password for your online accounts, your individual accounts, as you do at work? All right, that's good. Nobody would admit that anyway, would you? How many do you think your employees do? Use the same password?
Oh, blame them. Go on. You know, this is interesting because within IT, I always ask the people I speak to, you've got 10, 50, 100, 1,000 servers in your network. And you have IT administrators who manage those servers. Now, when it comes to the uber privileged accounts, root and administrator on Windows and Linux and Unix, I say, you know, let's say you've got 100 servers, you've got 100 of those accounts locally on that, 100 root accounts, let's say, on those servers. Are those accounts' passwords different? 90% of them say no. Why? Because as an IT administrator, I may have to touch each of those within the course of a month or a year or whatever. And if I have 100 different root passwords for 100 different, that's a pain. So not only are they the same, it means, so an attacker, if they compromise one, guess what? They know how to compromise them all. But they rarely change those passwords, and they're short so they can be remembered, and there's all the usual stuff about that, so it's kind of interesting. So another trend here is outsourced IT. This has not changed. It's getting worse. So what we're finding when I talk to IT C-level is they are trying to be more relevant to the operation of the agency or the business. And that means less work keeping the lights on and doing mundane operational stuff and focusing more on innovative solutions and services that can be more productive for everybody. Okay? How do they do that? They outsource. So they're outsourcing IT. They're outsourcing development functions. There's a lot of different services that are getting outsourced. So if we look at a little breach that happened back in 2013, which you may remember, we had a little outsourced company off to the right there, and they were providing services into this retailer. Everything was going well until they got hacked. And it was quite a long time before anybody figured out that they were hacked. But one individual's identity got compromised in some external social network, and they got into his system, and they figured out a VPN account login. I think they pulled it from memory using Hashcat or Mimikatz or something that can kind of pull passwords straight out of memory in plain text. And so this attacker then was able to legitimately log into the network through the VPN. It's a legitimate credential, and this guy didn't know that he'd been compromised. Then using some other tools that we've mentioned, they were able to get the ID and password to another server. It wasn't a privileged set of credentials, so they couldn't do everything on that, but they found enough on that server to give them local domain administration access to another one, and they went to another one, and finally, over the course of many, many, many months, they made their way to an Active Directory domain controller, where they were then able to create for themselves a domain admin account, keys to the kingdom. Okay, that's very typical. So you might be asking yourself, if you don't remember this, that outsourced entity there, was it outsourced IT? Was it outsourced development? Was it something to do with security or IT? No, it was an HVAC supplier. Innocuous, you might say, but these guys are creative. You don't have to be an IT supplier. You don't have to be a security supplier. You don't have to be an outsourced developer. There are so many ways of getting into the organization through third-party and outsourced services. So we looked at this, and we're not here to preach our solutions or sell you on our solutions, but we looked at that and we thought, there's a better way than that to support remote outsourced connectivity into resources, and offline at the booth or whatever, we can tell you about that. But we wanted to solve that, and we believe we have. So the future then does look very different. We believe it's going to consist of hybrid environments with Windows, yes, and Linux and Unix and multiple flavors of those things. We've got some customers that have flavors of Linux and Unix that you would not believe. We support over 300 ourselves because we have customers that literally have some very, very ancient versions of those systems. Lots more mobile, bring your own device. The vendors are being helpful there to us. They help us bring more security into this environment. We've had container-level security in things like Samsung Knox with their Knox containers that allow you to separate business from kind of agency stuff, so you can have that true BYOD experience. And now we're working on the new Google stuff, Google at Work, which does something similar. And obviously Apple has containerization as well. So we're making things easier from that perspective. And we also want to enable that because a lot of what goes on in terms of APTs and breaches can be very simply defended against using things as simple as smart cards. I say as simple as smart cards. If anybody has ever tried to implement that, then maybe not, actually, but trust me, it's not easy. And multi-factor authentication. And so being able to support mobile devices and register them and trust them and then leverage them as part of a second factor to authenticate to systems, or maybe if someone is looking to run a privileged command on a server and we send a notification to their phone, well, an APT, a headless user, will not have an iPhone. So you block it right there. So these are important things as well. Obviously, SaaS, we've spoken about that, about how more of these SaaS applications are being adopted. Infrastructure as a service, we'll get more on the commercial side. We're seeing that a lot of analytics applications, Hadoop, NoSQL, that kind of thing, which have kind of started off as kind of prototypes in the data centers, are soon going to be kind of migrating to the cloud where they get more elasticity and more scale for those types of projects. And ultimately, it's about access anywhere. It's about empowering your users. It's giving them the resources they need to do the job without sacrificing productivity, but having that layer of protection in there because the physical boundaries are disappearing. So with that, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 best practices. As I mentioned, in the appendix is like 10 of them. If you get really bored one evening, you can read those. But these are what I consider to be maybe the top 2 or 3 or 4 that we should be paying attention to. And again, the gray is not popping out. This is not fun. So essentially, we have little boxes around desktops and data center apps and data center servers. So back to that picture where we have identities all over the place. So probably no big surprise, what we want to do is centralize those identities. We want to get our house in order. We can't manage access to resources and we can't manage identities and how people use them until we know what we have. So what we advocate is basically creating for everybody a single unique identity. Now, our approach as a company is, guess what? A lot of organizations, a lot of agencies have invested in Active Directory, and it works very well in a Windows-centric environment. So why not extend that model beyond Windows to Linux, Unix, and Mac, and mobile, right? So now, what we can do is we can give everybody a central identity, a unique identity that ties back to them. So from a compliance perspective, where a lot of compliance mandates say, you've got to be accountable, you've got to have accountability. We have that unique ID. And now what we do is for those other non-Windows systems, we figure out a way of joining them to Active Directory. We fool AD into believing that that Unix box over there or that Mac over there is really a Windows box. Why? Because then we can manage it from the same portal that our IT administrators are used to managing their Windows environments. So you can manage your users, you can manage your computers directly from within Active Directory. We don't need to synchronize that data into yet another silo, into yet another policy management framework. We can do it right there within Active Directory. And it's like, oh, while we're doing that, wouldn't it be lovely if we could extend group policy beyond Windows into Unix, Mac, and Linux? So we do that too. We get greater productivity, greater security, okay? And while we're there, you know, Windows is really good at smart cards, right? So actually setting up and configuring smart card access in a Windows environment is actually relatively simple compared to everybody else. So as a company, we thought, well, we're in here already. Why don't we just extend that model to Unix, Linux, and Mac? The same story. That's what we've done. So now you're starting to see how the world is shaping. We're trying to get control over our identities through a single interface that people are already familiar with, that people have already invested lots of money in. We're managing it directly from there, extending the model outside of Windows, bringing it all together. So that's the first thing. Now, once we have our show in order, then in a perfect world, we want to disable every single privileged account. Disable it. Nobody is allowed to log in as root. No one's allowed to log in as administrator. No one's allowed to log in as Cisco ADM. No one's allowed to log in as SA or SQL. Okay. So then what happens? Well, again, we can't see this very well. That says root at the top, and that says Tony at the bottom. So Tony logs in as Tony with his least privileged account. Can't do much, just check his email, browse the web, do what he normally does as a regular individual user. Somebody knocks on the door and says, Tony, you're an administrator, the web server went down. Can you restart it? That's a privileged account. That's a privileged action. I have to run a command that requires privilege. So I need to elevate my privilege in order to run that service. That privilege elevation is what we do. Now, it's similar to sudo, but it is very different, and we can talk about that offline. So you elevate privilege so that for the duration of that command that's executing, it's running as, let's say, administrator or as root. It performs the action, and once it's done, then you're back down to a low level of privilege again. So maybe you can see here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reshape the attack surface. We're trying to shrink it down. We're trying to expose less of a surface to the attackers. And we're doing that by saying, if you compromise my account, right, you're not compromising a privileged account. You're not compromising an account that can sudo to root and have the keys to the kingdom. All that you do, if you do compromise my account, is have the ability to check mail and browse the web and do expenses. And if you try and do something with elevation, right, we can block you. We can lock you down. Or even if you are allowed to do that, it's only a small part of your privileged activities. So you can see we're spending 90% of our day at a low-risk state and maybe 5 or 10 in a high-risk state. That's the concept of least privilege. I've got 10 minutes. That's the concept of least privilege, right? That's true least privilege. Log in as yourself, elevate on an as-needed basis, back down to least privilege. But you're asking yourself, well, that's great, Tony, but disabling all these accounts is just impractical. You can't do it across the board. This is true. So things like upgrading the OS, emergency break glass situations, installing certain bits of software, you do need to log in directly as root. So that elevated path is not available to us. We have to go straight in as root in order to do that kind of stuff. So what are our options? The typical MO is to share those privileged accounts and passwords with a group of trusted administrators. This is typically what we do. Right? We have 10, 15 admins. Here's the passwords of those accounts. We trust you to look after it. Don't do anything silly, but that's what it is. Lots of problems with that. Lots of problems with that. They've got the keys to the kingdom. They share it with other people. They can get socially engineered. They tend to camp out all day. They log in as root in the morning. They never get off. So if they navigate to a website that has malware, it's going to execute as root rather than Tony, right? So there's lots of reasons why this is not a good idea. So what's the alternative then? The alternative, and remember, these are the exceptions rather than the rules. The privilege elevation is really what we should be doing to really mitigate our risks here. But this is for those exceptional conditions where we cannot disable those accounts. We put the passwords in a secure store, and then we give these users the ability to request login to those servers, but we don't reveal the password to them. right? We log them in automatically. They do what they're doing, and once they're done, we rotate the passwords. So you may realize here that by doing that, we get around that problem I mentioned earlier about having 100 servers with root on all of them, all having the same passwords. This thing can go out and change those passwords on all those systems, make them all different, make them all arbitrarily long and complex, because these IT administrators don't need to know what they are anymore. We're logging them in on their behalf and managing those passwords, okay? And then if you do this, typically this type of stuff may be done with an on-premises solution. If you do it in the cloud, as a cloud service, not only is it easier for IT because they don't have the hassle of infrastructure to deploy and all of that kind of stuff, it means we can now better accommodate remote outsourced use cases. So if we go back to that VPN hack, what we can do here is give the outsourced individual, the third party, a login to our portal here. They select the server that they want to log into. They click login, and we put them surgically on the server inside the data center. Not on the network, as we would with a VPN, on the server, so that the attack surface is further reduced, okay? And not only that, because we're coming in through a remote browser session, we're not physically attaching our laptop to the network. IT doesn't have to manage that as a managed endpoint. They have to do NAC and antivirus and anti-malware and all this other stuff, you know, for all these outsourced people. We're coming in through a browser session. So this is further reducing the effort on IT and further enhancing the security and driving down our attack surface, yes?
So what's stopping the bad guys from imposing, to pretend to be one of those administrators and fool the secure storage?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. So you do need to have additional controls, like multi-factor authentication. So you could have policies that say if you're inside the network and you're trying to log in here and you're trying to do this remote session, that's fine. You're inside the internal network. User ID and password is fine. But if you're outside the network, let's say, or if your behavior is like, hang on, or if your geography, your geographical location is kind of not aligned with your job function, you could prompt for a second factor. Remember I said earlier, if we're managing our identity centrally within Active Directory, we can also manage your mobile devices. So we have a registered mobile device for you. I can send or this system can send a push notification to your mobile phone. It pops up and says, Tony, you're trying to access this server or this account through this system, grant or deny. And you're like, that's not me. Deny. So you deny that, but you're alerted to the fact that maybe there's been a compromise on your account, so you go through the motions of changing your password or doing some investigation, et cetera, et cetera.
And a follow-on question is that your secure storage now becomes the biggest target because the bad actor only needed to compromise that thing.
That's a very good point. So you need to have options. So one option is, yes, we could store these passwords and these credentials in the cloud, which not everybody's going to be comfortable with. The other one is you give customers an option to have, let's say, an HSM on premises within their data center. It's encrypted, it has their own private keys, it's under their control. We don't touch it, we don't cache it, we don't synchronize with it. But when we need a password in order to log people in, that's what we access. We access that system.
You know, back to your first question, I think that Tony's point to kind of drive it home is we've got to become contextually aware of requests for resources or access.
Exactly.
To his point, you know, if this request is coming from a different geography, it's coming from a different device, it's coming across a different network, then that user typically requests that access. That's when we say, hold on here, let's authenticate that you are who you say you are, and ask for that two-factor authentication.
That's a level of identity assurance that you need to layer into this thing as well. So another best practice, I've jumped to number 8 now out of 10, is eliminate passwords where possible. So smart cards are brilliant. I mean, you know, you may say, well, it's hard to get them working. We've managed to achieve that. We get them working very, very simply within Windows, and we've extended that model beyond Windows, again, leveraging that single Active Directory infrastructure in order to make it all happen. So you could imagine you're on a Mac or you're on a Unix box and you put in your smart card, you enter your PIN, you're authenticated. There's no local accounts anymore. We've kind of got them all now in Active Directory. You don't need to do local account management. So we authenticate against AD, we get a Kerberos ticket, we get the value of single sign-on as well, you know. So this is all pretty cool. So even if it's only those 3, and I said I've got 10 of them, so you can look those up at your leisure, but centrally managing identities, authentication, and enforcing granular access control policies, right? This gives IT a lot of productivity gains. We allow administrators to elevate their privilege, in a manner that they're familiar with, so we're not kind of changing their behavior in any way. And we're adding more security, we're shrinking down that attack surface. And then privileged elevation. We firmly believe that that is the best way. If you did only one thing, it would be the privileged elevation, right? The other one, which is the vaulting the passwords, that is an exception. It's a small percentage of the overall use cases. You should be disabling what you can, least privileged with privileged elevation. You'll find a lot of vendors out there who are newer. We're about 10 years old. We spent a lot of years developing this technology. This is hard. Doing privileged elevation is very, very hard. Putting passwords in a vault is relatively easy. That's why a lot of our competitors have kind of gone that route, and they're like going, this solves all your problems, guys. This is how you want to do it. But I'm hoping you're getting a sense that by doing it that way, it's one part of the puzzle, but it's a small sliver of the puzzle. Quick question?
So it's CDM or footwear, footwears or CDM footwear, is that kind of a main competitor that you say?
They do provide password vaulting capabilities as well, yes. There's others, there's Lieberman, I think Balabits is another one. There are, CyberArk is another one. They tend to focus on that password vaulting. And to be honest, it's kind of easy. It's a proxy, it just sits there, right? You can bypass proxies. We advocate doing privilege elevation on a per host basis so that you have controls on the host. You can be doing session recording, video recording of sessions for forensic analysis on that host, okay? It's kind of like, I wouldn't want to put, an intrusion alarm on my front door only because I know there's going to be side windows and back doors, right? You can get around these things. And then the smart cards and MFA. So avoid passwords altogether if you can. Completely eliminate pass the hash, which is still very, very prevalent. And of course, with bots and stuff like that, they can't react to a push notification to grant or deny access that comes to a mobile device. So you kind of block that kill chain. So I'm gonna finish up here. I've got like 1 minute. So that's supposed to be red. It's not red, because threat is red, right? Threat is red. So to sum it up, there's a number of steps that we've discussed here. Unify and centralize identities. Disable privileged accounts wherever humanly possible. And then enforce least privilege. Have people log in with their own accounts, have a role-based mechanism that grants them access to do certain things, and when they need to elevate privilege, give them a means to do that in a way that they're familiar with, okay, that's better manageable by IT. For those where you can't, stick them in a secure vault where you've got those passwords under your protection. You can rotate them often. You can hand them out to certain people, again, based on a role-based access. And you can do it in a cloud-based fashion to better satisfy remote use cases like outsourced IT, outsourced development, or HVAC operators, okay? Eliminate passwords, use smart cards. I love that one. And we didn't talk about it, but monitoring privileged activities. Yes, you can audit to log files, but forensic analysis requires video session recording. You need to be doing that as well. Searchable. So if you have a 5-hour video and you're looking for somebody who typed sudo, you can actually search through that video and index right into it where the sudo command was being entered, and you can get to the meat. So these are all very, very important things. My time is up, isn't it? Okay, I do have a case study, but I'll leave that up there for anybody who wants to look at it. So I do apologize that we've really hit the limit here. It's probably because of my Welsh introduction, so I apologize about that. But if you do have any questions, we're here for the next foreseeable future. Come and talk to us. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
And one other thing, if you wouldn't mind filling out the evaluation there that you have.
And be kind.
And leave it, and be kind. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for your time today.